What is up, my fellow writing addicts? I'm Marissa, and today we're discussing how to name your book. Because aside from the cover, your book title is like the second or most important part of, the outside of the book. It has to have a bunch of necessities so that way it can be spread either word of mouth or just be memorable, but we'll get to all that. Now, to start off, what is the necessities for a book title? Well, the first thing is that it has to be intriguing because it has to be eye-catching. And as I said, memorable. I can't talk today. But if people, if they're walking through a store and you see it and you're like, ooh, what's that? It's happened to me 1,000,001 times. So that's what you really have to do. It also has to be informative. What does it tell your reader, about the book? What does it tell you about the genre? If I see a book from across the room that says The Wild Wild West, I know that's the Western section. I don't want to go over there. I don't like Westerns, but if you do, you're going to make a beeline because that's telling you what it is. If you see from across the room, Alpha Beast Husband, that's either romance or erotica. Whatever that is. Shitty title, apologies, but I swear that's a book out somewhere. Ugh. Anyway, but you know automatically a little bit about what's going on. That's the whole point. As I keep saying, your book title needs to be memorable because how else are people going to spread it by word of mouth? So many times people come up to me and be like, oh my God, you have to read blank by blank. And that's a lot of times how I get my book recommendations because people will tell me. But it's also when people tell me it, I then have to go home, typically, or later on my phone, look up that book. If I can't remember it, how am I supposed to find it and how am I supposed to read it? So you have to make sure that it stays in the public's attention. Everyone remembers The Hunger Games. Everyone remembers Harry Potter. They have to remember your title. Following that, because it actually goes right hand in hand, it has to be easy to say and or spell. Because if it's honestly hard to say, how am I supposed to spread it by word of mouth? If it's hard to spell, how am I supposed to type it in and find the right one? The best examples I have for you are It's a Bitch to Say, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Susan Collins, and It's a Bitch to Spell by The Silmarillion by Tolkien, because I can't do English today. But the reason those work and the reason they exist is because they're not the first work we were given. Of course, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is the prequel to The Hunger Games. Again, everyone knows The Hunger Games. The Silmarillion is, I don't know if it's a prequel, but it's a lot of information about the, the Lord of the Rings series and The Hobbit. It's not the first thing, but if you look up The Hobbit, The Silmarillion will not be far behind. So that's why, for those instances, it's okay. And lastly, it can't be problematic to say in public. If I have to walk up to my friends and go, oh my God, this book's amazing, it'll change your life. Oh, what's it called? It's called Dan's Dildo Disaster. It's called what? Dan's Dildo Disaster. I don't want to say that in public, guys. I mean, I would because I have no shame, but most readers have that, or so I'm told. And you can't really do that unless you're tackling a very sensitive subject and you kind of want to cut through the BS. This could be maybe about more nonfiction, about periods or menopause, because I know men kind of shy away from it, but for women it's no, let's just cut to the chase. It also could be for a shock factor, you want it to be shocking, if you have the word dildo in the title. That's what you want, but be careful. It has to match the tone of the book, because if it's just shocking for shock's sake, people are going to notice and they're going to not like it. They might even borderline hate it. One example of it being a little bit shocking is Let's Eat Grandma. It's a grammar book by Karina Law, and obviously with a comma, it's Hey Grandma, let's eat, versus Let's Eat Grandma, she's delicious. That's kind of what they're saying with that. Now I have some steps that should help you come up with your book title, and the first thing is understanding your book. What is it about? What is the genre? And most importantly, what is your target audience? Because the title for, let's say a Halloween book is going to be a lot different for kids versus teenagers versus adults. Because, you can get away a lot more with, teenagers and adults. But that's something to consider. The next thing you can do is simply make a list, either typing or, pen and paper. I prefer the second one, but that's just me. And you simply sit down and you write all the book names that come to your head, from the stupid ones to the silly ones to the ones that, might sound good. Just write it all down. Don't say no to anything just yet. And once you've exhausted that list, try some book name generators. They do exist. There's even one, I can't remember the site for my life, I'll have to put it on screen, that can go in based on genre, like fantasy or adventure, action, to kind of narrow it down. And they're just wonderful. And of course, once you have your list, you go through and you cross off the ones you don't like because, even if you knew you wouldn't like it, at least now it's out of your head. And now you have a nice clear list of like what you like and it's beautiful. Once you've narrowed it down to that beautiful list, take it to a trusted, family member or friend or writer friend, whatever have you, whoever you trust. I send it to multiple people and I have them cross ones off the list because some that sound amazing to me doesn't sound that great to them. It could sound generic or just bad or confusing. So let them, kind of like write a little X, be like, that's not the one I want. And you can like take it like a vote. And then once you're done, you have that title written down. Give it a few days and see if it stays in your head. I know when, that's what I look for especially, is I want a title that stays with me for a few days. And if it doesn't, then I just redo the process. And that's fine to take your time because again, this is super important. And no matter what you do to find your title, make sure that you test it by saying it out loud. Say it to a trusted person in your life. And of course, sleep on it. See if it stays with you. That is super important. Because, if it passes all those tests, then cool. You have your book title. Hooray! Now that you have your book title, there's always that creeping question that typically pops up, which is, do I need a subtitle? And if you're doing nonfiction, the answer is yes. Again, it's very rare that you don't see one because the subtitle will contextualize the subject. Like if your title is PTSD, which I've seen a lot in bold letters, there's a ton of books on that. So what are you trying to say? Is it like a new study? Are you trying to say ways to deal with it? A lot of times that could be the subtitle. And it basically talks about, what is the book about? Who's the book for? And what will the book deliver on? Again, there's a difference in let's talk about what PTSD is versus this is a workbook to help you work through your PTSD. Very different things, but will typically be in the subtitle. Now for fiction, you can have a subtitle. It's not, out of the ordinary, especially if you have an anthology. If the title is like, Big Bad Witches, obviously it kind of tells us, but the subtitle can tell us a little bit more. Maybe it's a Halloween series. Maybe it's for like dark forests or like fairy tale kind of witches. Like what are we dealing with? That's where that subtitle will come in. Of course, it could also be because it's part of a series. You have good examples, the Mortal Instruments. Book 1 is typically the subtitle. It could also be like the Mortal Instrument series. I'm not crazy. And that can be the subtitle too, is telling people, hey, this is not only part of a series, but where it lands. Because if I pick up, book 4 of a series, I want to know. Of course, it can also just fit the tone. My favorite example of this is Good Omens, because the official title is Good Omens, the nice and accurate prophecies of Agnes Nutter, Witch, by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. It fits the book. It just does. Now, of course, I have some tips to help you, come up with some book titles if, like the steps from before, maybe narrowed it down but didn't give you an exact title. And the first one is always Google the title. And this is because you want to make sure that the book title shares a book with something that isn't very popular or just doesn't exist at all. Preferably, the second one, because then there's little to no competition. Because especially, you don't want to put out a book that's close to something very popular. I saw one book called The Inheritance Games. I don't even need to say the problem there. We all know. It's nothing like The Hunger Games. But the fact that the name is so close adds some issues. You could also use the main character or the main conflict. A lot of classics do this. You have Dracula, who's the main conflict. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, who is the main characters. It's really, classic, basically, to do. You could, of course, use like a popular or, significant location in the book. To mention it again, City of Bones is an actual location in the book where they go to. As long as it is basically somewhat significant, more than just a footnote, it'll be fine. You could also use a, noteworthy phrase from the book. A good example of this is A Game of Thrones by George R. R. Martin. I will say, though, as a disclaimer, I have not read the book. I've only seen the show. So please tell me down in the comments below if it's actually confirmed to be said in the book. I really hope it is, because that's a bomb-ass line. And of course, it could always be something like a relevant keyword. This is especially true if you're doing nonfiction, because this will help your searchability. Again, back to my example from before, if you are doing something on PTSD, you don't want to call it something without those key words in it, or at least, either the acronym or the disorder, spelled out, because if I type in PTSD book, I want it to come up, and so do you. Let's also not forget, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Sometimes you try to go big and complicated on a name and it just won't work. Sometimes keeping it simple is the best way. That is sometimes the most eye-catching, because it'll be different than especially if complicated names are all the rage now, then it'll flood the market, and sometimes having that simple name will be eye-catching. You could also use like metaphors or symbols. My favorite example of this is, Mockingjay by Suzanne Collins, because by the time we got that book, we knew that symbol, and it's also just a really cool name, so why not use it? There's another thing I haven't tried, but I do love, and that's alliteration, where you start every word, except for like the beginning, which is typically with the same letter. A great example of this is The Bad Beginning by Lemony Snicket. That whole series, the series of unfortunate events, starts like that. Like everything, like the reptile room. That's just how it works, and that's how you know it's part of that series. So it works in just so many ways, I don't want to count them. The title can also be just one word. This is popular nowadays, but I've seen that its popularity has lasted for like a good decade, so I think it's okay if you want to try this. It just has to be the right word. It can't just be any word. You can't just put like taco and your word be about like this deep mystery. That'd make no fucking sense. I mean, I'd still pick up a book called Taco, because what the fuck is that about? But don't do that. But I have seen a lot of things like passion and marked and lost. And again, you have to be really careful with when you pick, but it could be very fascinating. To me, I like one words because they bring this element of mystery, like what has been marked, what's been lost. I'm kind of sick of lost, but you know what I mean. Like, it's those kind of things. But when you do have your title, please think about how it's going to be internationally. And when we all know, think about Harry Potter, where, overseas it's a Philosopher's Stone, but for America they changed it to Sorcerers. They didn't need to, but they thought that was the best move. My favorite example is actually the movie Moana, because the title character overseas, like in the UK, I know it's more locations, but that's the name of a porn star. So they changed her name to Vianna, so 5-year-olds weren't accidentally looking up a porn star. So it's stuff like that you really want to be careful about. You also need to think about how does it look on the cover. Those long titles might not look good on your book, especially if it's like really small, like you want to do a 5x6 or 6x9. So if you want a bigger book and your book is big enough to have it, great. It might not work though, so just keep that in mind when you are selecting your title. If you are still kind of stuck, I do have one of my favorite tips actually for how to gain a title is a title that has 2 meanings. My favorite example of this is Possession by Lynn Ewing. In the book, the character sees this guy as a possession. She wants to possess him, but she herself also ends up being possessed. And I mean that in the ghost way of she was possessed and he wanted to possess her, but he didn't realize it till the end, and that's why I think they're so good. Lastly, the thing you want to think about is if your book is part of a series, you might basically, I honestly recommend it, is you'll want something that's formulaic. I'm going to bring up a ton here, but there's, Harry Potter and the blank. That's very recognizable. Percy Jackson and the blank. There's the series I'm writing with Haley where it goes like and then it's a color, and then, something that goes along, an item or a name that goes along with the book. We've mentioned the Crimson Ace a long time, and that's the formula. That's how you know what part of it is. You could also do this with the cover, but this is for, another video. But essentially, there was a book series that had a gold element, whether it be an eye or lips or like just glitter being like blown out, like something. That's another way to connect it. So you don't have to, but again, I recommend it just because I feel like it sticks with people a lot more. And that's all I have for you today. Please tell me in the comments down below, how do you name your books? I'm really curious. You can also tell me on Twitter at writing_addicts or on Facebook at facebook.com/writingaddicts. You can also tell me, on Instagram. I'd be really happy to see you guys there. Our name is at writing.addicts. And please, of course, naturally hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell so it tells you, when we put out videos, and please hit that like button. And I will see you next time. Bye, lovelies!